Welcome to a project dedicated to history. We'll journey into the past, allowing you to drift into sleep and benefit from it. Don't forget to leave feedback and show your support. By the end of our tale, you'll be sound asleep. Close your eyes, and we'll begin our adventure. France is truly a unique country. On the map of Europe, you can see many great powers, but France has influenced the fates of various continents for centuries. Its history isn't just a sequence of events, it's a narrative of ideas, revolutions, culture, and art that changed the world forever. What makes France so significant in world history? First, key events that shaped the development of Europe occurred on this land. The Great French Revolution took place here, transforming not only France, but humanity's views on freedom, equality, and human rights. Napoleon emerged from this soil, briefly forcing Europe to adhere to French laws and permanently altering its political landscape. Culture, art, and philosophy developed here, inspiring minds worldwide, from the Enlightenment with Voltaire and Rousseau to the Impressionists and Existentialists of the 20th century. France has gifted us many things we consider norms in modern society, including a legal system, foundations of civil law, secular education, and democratic principles that influence numerous countries. Why is France called the cultural center of Europe? The answer is clear. Over the centuries, this nation attracted the greatest creators, artists, writers, philosophers, and thinkers. Paris became a symbol of global culture, fashion, and art. Here, geniuses like Leonardo da Vinci and Pablo Picasso worked, along with writers like Hugo and Camus. For a long time, French was the international language of diplomacy, science, and art, while French literature inspired writers and poets everywhere. People from around the world visited France to experience this unique cultural atmosphere. France remains a reflection of European civilization. Through its history, we can see how the entire world changed, from ancient times to today's global challenges and quests for new identity. That's why we'll embark on a long and fascinating journey to explore the complete history of France, a nation essential to understanding the history of Europe and humanity. The story of France traces back to ancient times, long before the eras that typically come to mind when we mention this country, even before cities and fortresses arose, long before the first kings and knights, people inhabited modern-day France, living completely different lives. Yet, they laid the foundation for all that followed. The earliest evidence of humanity in this region dates back over 1,000,000 years. The lands now covered with fields and vineyards were once populated by primitive humans like Homo erectus and later Neanderthals. These ancient Europeans survived by hunting and gathering, adapting to harsh ice ages and changing climates. About 40,000 years ago, new inhabitants arrived in Europe, including France, the Cro-Magnons. They were the first representatives of our species, Homo sapiens. Physically similar to modern humans, they possessed advanced creative abilities and abstract thinking. They crafted tools and weapons with remarkable precision: knives, scrapers, spears, and arrowheads, adorned with intricate patterns and symbols. Particularly significant evidence of the first Europeans can be found in the Dordogne region in southwestern France, where the famous Cro-Magnon cave was discovered. In 1868, French geologist Louis Lartet unearthed ancient human remains over 30,000 years old, astonishing scientists. Cro-Magnons were tall. The average male height reached 180 centimeters. Robust, with developed muscles and strong skeletons, enabling survival in the Ice Age. However, the most famous contributions from modern France are the unique cave paintings created by Cro-Magnons around 20,000 years ago. The Lascaux Caves, discovered in 1940 by 4 teenagers, are the most impressive and well-known testimony of primitive art. Their walls are adorned with hundreds of vibrant and exceptionally realistic depictions of animals such as deer, bulls, bison, rhinoceroses, and horses. Some animals appear in motion, reflecting the artist's keen observations of wildlife behavior. Interestingly, ancient masters used natural materials like ochre, charcoal, and animal fat, preserving the vividness of colors for millennia. The purpose of these drawings remains a mystery. Archaeologists suggest the images might have been part of rituals related to hunting and magical ceremonies aimed at attracting luck in catching prey. This is indirectly supported by the fact that many animal depictions in the caves are pierced by symbolic arrows and spears. Another remarkable discovery was the Chauvet Cave, opened in 1994 in southern France. Its walls feature the oldest cave drawings in Europe, created about 30,000 years ago. In addition to images of animals, mysterious symbolic signs and handprints of primitive people were found there. Scientists were astonished not only by the antiquity of the find, but also by the artistic value of these images. Their lines are clear, the composition meaningful, and the subjects filled with expression. Besides artistic works, Cro-Magnons left evidence of their daily life and beliefs. In some locations, early examples of jewelry and adornments were found, necklaces made from shells, bones, and animal teeth, which held both aesthetic and symbolic roles, protecting their owners from evil spirits and misfortunes. Musical instruments were also important in Cro-Magnon life. The oldest musical instruments in Europe, flutes made from mammoth and bird bones, were found in France. This indicates that music played a significant role in the lives of ancient people, uniting them into a community and possibly becoming part of spiritual rituals. Cro-Magnons lived in small settlements of lightweight structures covered with animal skins. Remnants of such camps were found in the La Magdeleine area in southern France, revealing numerous traces of fires, animal bones, and tools, allowing scientists to reconstruct the daily lives of ancient people. After Cro-Magnons disappeared from history, new peoples emerged, creating a completely different world in the future territory of France. Around the first millennium BCE, the Celts settled these lands, a people whose culture, the lifestyle of the Celts significantly influenced the development of European history as a whole. These groups represented numerous tribes that spread across much of Western and Central Europe. However, it was the region known as Gaul, modern France, that became the key center of their culture and civilization. The Gauls, as the Romans called the Celts, created a society that symbolized freedom, strength, and deep religiosity. The structure of Celtic society was quite complex, consisting of many tribes, each with its own leader and lands. Tribes could form alliances or, conversely, wage ruthless wars against each other. A pronounced social hierarchy existed in this society. At the top were the aristocracy, leaders, and nobility, who held significant power. Below them were free commoners, warriors, and craftsmen, forming the backbone of society. Priests known as druids played an important role. These clergymen were not only spiritual leaders but also guardians of the wisdom and knowledge of the people. They served as judges, healers, and mentors, and were the only ones who could read and write in their secret language. However, they preferred to pass on their knowledge orally, making it accessible only to the chosen few. Because of this, many aspects of their teachings remain a mystery to modern researchers. According to ancient accounts, Druidic training lasted over 20 years. During this time, they mastered thousands of verses, studied nature, astronomy, philosophy, and the secrets of medicinal plants. Their authority among the Celts was so great that even leaders and kings dared not go against their opinions. Celtic religion was deeply connected to nature. The Gauls worshipped many gods representing the forces of nature. The chief among them was Taranis, the god of thunder, akin to the Greek Zeus. They also honored the god of fertility, the mother goddess, protector of the land and harvest, and the god of war, Tiwat. Trees, especially oaks, were considered sacred and served as places for druidic rituals. There was a belief that oaks possessed magical power, linking the world of the living to the spirit realm. Therefore, many sanctuaries were located in oak groves, where entry was forbidden to ordinary people without the Druids' permission. Important ceremonies, including sacrifices, were held in these places. However, contrary to popular belief, human sacrifices were extremely rare and occurred only in critical moments. The Celts placed enormous importance on the afterlife, believing that the souls of the deceased were reborn. They viewed death as a transition to a new world, explaining their bravery on the battlefield. The Celts did not fear death, confident in the possibility of continuous rebirth. Celtic culture was known not only for its spiritual aspects, but also for the craftsmanship of its artisans and warriors. Their metallurgical skills reached remarkable heights. Gallic blacksmiths crafted exquisite swords, spears, battle chariots, shields, and helmets adorned with intricate designs. These products impressed contemporaries with their beauty and effectiveness in combat, and many Celtic technical achievements were later borrowed by the Romans. Celtic jewelry also held an important place. Their adornments, bracelets, and rings were often made from gold and bronze, featuring images of animals and mythical creatures. One of the most recognized symbols of Celtic culture became the massive neck ring called a torque, a sign of nobility and valor. It was worn by renowned warriors and leaders, emphasizing their high status. The clothing of the Gauls was bright and expressive. Men wore tunics and trousers, which the Romans later called Gallic, as well as colorful cloaks. Women decorated their outfits with embroidery and flowers, sporting elaborate hairstyles and jewelry. Music and poetry also played a central role in society. Poets and bards enjoyed great respect. Their creativity was seen as a divine gift. Bards accompanied important events, singing of heroes' deeds and inspiring warriors. Their music resonated at feasts and religious ceremonies, creating an atmosphere of unity and spiritual uplift. Despite all their cultural achievements, the Celts could not maintain their independence forever. Their quest for freedom clashed with the military might of the Roman Empire. Celtic Gaul, with its freedom-loving tribes, could not remain indifferent to the unfolding history in Europe during Caesar's conquest of Gaul. The events of this historical period forever changed Gaul's fate. Legions of the Roman Republic, commanded by the ambitious general Gaius Julius Caesar, advanced into its lands. By this time, Rome had already become a powerful state, controlling much of the Mediterranean. Gaul remained one of the few unconquered regions in Western Europe. The Romans viewed the Gauls as barbarians, perceiving them as warlike and unpredictable. However, Gaul possessed abundant natural resources, fertile lands, gold and iron. Conquering these lands could bring not only glory, but also security to Rome's northern borders. In 58 BCE, Gaius Julius Caesar, appointed governor of Noricum Gaul, decided to begin a campaign to conquer all the territory of the Celtic tribes. This marked the beginning of the famous Gallic Wars, which lasted nearly 8 years and were described by Caesar himself in his commentaries on the Gallic War. During these military actions, Gallic warriors demonstrated the tactical differences between Roman and Celtic armies. The Gauls were renowned for their personal bravery and skill in close combat, but suffered from a lack of organization in large battles, while the Romans excelled in strict discipline and coordination. Caesar exploited the advantages of Roman legions, their mobility and tactical superiority. He expertly employed a strategy of divide and conquer, pitting various Celtic tribes against each other and forming alliances. Nevertheless, the Gauls were not inclined to surrender without a fight. The early years of the war were filled with fierce battles and stubborn resistance. In 58 BCE, the first major confrontation occurred with the Germanic tribes of the Helvetii and Suebi, who attempted to cross Gaul. Caesar achieved a decisive victory, establishing his military influence over the territory. One of the most significant events of the war was the battle against the German leader Ariovistus, who sought to conquer part of Gaul. This victory made Caesar a hero in the eyes of the Romans and demonstrated the might of Roman forces to the Celtic tribes. The most dramatic moment of the conflict came with the uprising of the Celtic leader Vercingetorix in 52 BCE. This talented leader managed to unite numerous Celtic tribes against a common enemy, creating a powerful alliance capable of resisting Caesar for the first time. Vercingetorix possessed charisma and personal courage, making him a symbol of Celtic resistance. Displaying exceptional military skills, he preferred to avoid open battles, seeking to weaken the Romans through exhausting raids and blockades. However, the climax of the conflict was the famous siege of Alesia, the key battle of the Gallic War. Caesar surrounded the Gallic tribe's city with powerful fortifications and moats, completely isolating Vercingetorix's forces. When numerous tribes came to aid the besieged, Caesar displayed exceptional tactical ingenuity by creating a double line of fortifications, one for besieging the city and the other for defense against external attacks. After long and exhausting battles, the besieged, starving, were forced to capitulate. To save his people from destruction, Vercingetorix emerged from the city and surrendered to Caesar. The leader of the Gauls was sent to Rome, where, after a few years, he died in prison, and his defeat marked the beginning of the end of Gallic independence. Caesar's victory made him a hero of Rome, bringing him wealth and fame. Gaul was transformed into a Roman province, marking the start of an era of active Romanization. The Latin language, Roman. Laws and culture spread rapidly across the region as the Celtic civilization gradually became part of the expansive Roman world. The Gallic War left a significant mark not only on France's history, but also on European culture as a whole. Caesar's accounts of the war became classic works of ancient literature and essential historical sources, offering insights into Celtic society and Roman military strategies. In modern France, Vercingetorix emerged as a symbol of national pride and independence. Monuments and artistic works, including a majestic statue at the battle site, were erected in his honor as commissioned by Napoleon II in the 19th century. The image of the proud Gallic leader resisting foreign invaders became a vital part of the French historical memory. After Caesar conquered Gaul, a new era began, completely transforming these lands and profoundly influencing France's future history. The era of Roman Gaul commenced, where the previously considered barbaric Gallic culture began to rapidly adopt Roman traditions, language, architecture, and lifestyle. Romans were not just conquerors seeking to dominate and exploit subjugated peoples. They also represented a powerful civilization capable of integrating foreign traditions and creating a unique cultural environment. Consequently, the process of active Romanization began after the conquest. Large and prosperous cities emerged on the sites of old Celtic settlements, becoming strongholds of Roman influence. Notable examples of Roman influence include the Gallo-Roman cities, among which Lugdunum, now known as Lyon, Nemausus, modern Nîmes, Marseille, Arausio, Orange, and Lutetia, future Paris, stood out. These cities quickly developed into centers of trade, crafts, and cultural life. They built amphitheaters, baths, temples, and aqueducts, whose architectural beauty still captivates visitors. Founded in 43 BCE, Lugdunum soon became Gaul's largest city and its capital, strategically located at the crossroads of major trade routes, ensuring its rapid development. Large fairs attracted traders from throughout the Roman world. The city was renowned not just for commerce, but also for cultural life, theaters, and schools of rhetoric, where the Gallic elite were educated. Nemausus is famous for its impressive monuments of ancient Roman architecture, particularly the massive amphitheater and the Maison Carrée, one of the best preserved buildings of the Roman world. These structures attest to the city's wealth and prosperity, which served as an important trade center. Arausio, now known as Orange, gained fame for its gigantic amphitheater and magnificent triumphal arch built to celebrate the victories of Emperor Augustus. This arch is considered one of the finest examples of ancient Roman architecture in Europe. Roman Gaul facilitated the development of infrastructure essential for the region's prosperity. The Romans constructed famous roads connecting major cities, ensuring safe travel for merchants, craftsmen, and troops. These roads were built so well that many are still in use today, nearly 2,000 years later. Besides roads, the Romans also created aqueducts, majestic structures to supply cities with fresh water. The most famous aqueduct, the Pont du Gard, located near Nîmes, was built in the 1st century CE. Its impressive design of massive stone arches still inspires awe among tourists and engineers worldwide. The cultural life of Roman Gaul was rich and diverse. The Latin language gradually displaced Celtic dialects, becoming the language of the educated classes. French later evolved from Latin, incorporating elements of the earlier Gallic speech. In religion, Roman culture exhibited openness and tolerance. Romans didn't prohibit Gauls from worshipping their gods, often identifying them with their own deities. For instance, the Gallic Taranis was associated with Jupiter, while Esus was linked with Mars or Mercury. This helped form a unified religious culture where Gallic and Roman traditions intertwined. Over time, the inhabitants of Gaul fully embraced the Roman pantheon, with temples to Jupiter, Mars, Minerva, and other gods built in every city. The economy in Gaul also flourished. Romans introduced new agricultural methods, leading to the mass cultivation of vineyards and olive trees, with the province of Aquitaine, now in southwestern France, becoming renowned for high-quality wine supplied to the Roman elite. Roman Gaul produced many outstanding figures, including the famous philosopher and poet Ausonius, born in Bordeaux, and celebrated for his literary works. He is regarded as one of the founders of Gallo-Roman literature, significantly influencing all of Western European culture. However, by the end of the 2nd century and the beginning of the 1st century CE, the Roman Empire began to weaken gradually, facing internal crises and external invasions by barbarian tribes. Gaul, as part of this vast empire, couldn't escape these calamities. Germanic tribes such as the Franks, Alemanni, and Visigoths began invading. Soon, Rome's control over the province weakened, and by the 5th century, the territory of former Roman Gaul became a battleground for fierce conflicts among various tribes. As the Roman Empire weakened, its territories couldn't withstand the pressure from numerous barbarian tribes, leading to the era of the Great Migration, which transformed the face of Europe. This period, lasting until the 6th century, completely reshaped the lands of Gaul, giving them a new name and new rulers who would forever determine France's future. Numerous Germanic tribes, including the Goths, Vandals, Burgundians, Alemanni, and of course the Franks, surged into the former Roman province. The Franks played a crucial role in establishing a new state in these lands. The Franks were a Germanic people, originally living along the banks of the Rhine. Their name came from an ancient Germanic word meaning free or bold. They were known for their bravery and warlike nature, living in harsh conditions, hunting, herding, farming, and conducting military raids. They increasingly raided Roman territories. Gradually, the Franks began to settle in Gaul, taking advantage of the Romans' preoccupation with other barbarian conflicts and internal strife. Unlike many other tribes, the Franks weren't solely focused on plundering and destruction. Their goal was to settle down, occupy fertile lands, build their settlements, and establish control. They slowly but surely took root in Gallic soil, laying the foundations for a new society. The first remembered Frankish ruler was Childeric I, who reigned during the time of Clovis I and the Merovingian dynasty in the mid-5th century. However, the true founder of the Frankish state, unifying various fragmented tribes and creating a single political power, was his son Clovis I. Clovis ascended to the throne in 481 CE as a boy, but quickly proved to be a decisive and capable ruler. He actively expanded Frankish lands, conquering many neighboring Germanic and Gallo-Roman tribes. By the end of the 5th century, most of northern and central Gaul was under his control. One of the key events during Clovis's reign was his conversion to Christianity. In 496 CE, after his victory against the Alemanni at the Battle of Tolbiac, Clovis was baptized by Bishop Remigius in the city of Reims. This event became a turning point in French history, as a German ruler accepted Catholic Christianity instead of Arianism for the first time. Thus, Clovis secured the support of the powerful Gallo-Roman Christian Church, which saw him as its defender and ally. The baptism of Clovis and his warriors symbolized the unity of the Franks and the Gallo-Roman population, marking the beginning of the formation of the French people. This event also ensured Clovis the backing of the clergy, which later helped strengthen and expand his power. From this moment, the Merovingian dynasty began, named after the legendary Frankish ancestor Merovech. This dynasty was the first Frankish royal line to rule Gaul for nearly 300 years from the 5th to the 7th century. During this period, Gaul transformed into the kingdom of the Franks. The Franks gradually mingled with the local population, adopting the Latin language, culture, and traditions, while retaining many of their Germanic customs. Frankish society had a strict hierarchy. The king held absolute power, but heavily relied on the support of local nobility and warriors. One characteristic of Merovingian rule was the division of the kingdom among heirs, often leading to bloody civil conflicts. These constant divisions and disputes weakened the state, making it vulnerable to external threats and internal turmoil. This feature later earned the last Merovingians the nickname the Lazy Kings, as actual power gradually shifted to their managers, the mayors of the palace. Nevertheless, despite internal conflicts, the Merovingian period marked a significant stage in the formation of European civilization. Art, especially jewelry craftsmanship, flourished, and magnificent manuscripts adorned with gold and precious stones were created. Architecture developed as the first monasteries and churches were built, becoming centers of culture and enlightenment. One notable monument of this time was the Salic Law, a code of laws for the Franks established at Clovis's behest. This document regulated nearly all aspects of life, from penalties for crimes to rules for land inheritance. The Salic Law became the foundation for France's future legal system and influenced European jurisprudence. During this period, active monastery construction began in France, such as the Abbey of Saint-Denis, founded in the 6th century, which became the primary burial site for French kings. After a long period of internal conflict, the power of the Merovingians gradually weakened, making way for a new political force poised to change the face of France and all of Europe. This force was the Carolingian dynasty, which began with the mayors of the palace, the highest court officials of the Frankish kingdom, who slowly took full power from the lazy kings. A crucial moment came with the rise of Pepin the Short, the first official king from the Carolingian dynasty. In the mid-8th century, Pepin secured the support of the Pope, who officially recognized his right to the royal throne. This event held exceptional importance, as for the first time in Western medieval history, the Pope took it upon himself to decide who deserved to be king. In 751, Pepin was crowned and officially proclaimed King of the Franks, while the last Merovingian was sent to a monastery. Thus, the Carolingian era began, and its influence spread far beyond France. However, the true flourishing of the Frankish state occurred under Charlemagne and the Carolingian Renaissance that came with Pepin's son, the legendary Charlemagne. Born around 742, Charlemagne ruled from 760 to 814, becoming one of Europe's greatest leaders. His reign was marked by vast conquests, important reforms, and profound cultural transformations, later called the Carolingian Renaissance. Charlemagne was a man of immense scale and character. Contemporaries described him as tall, strong, and majestic, with a powerful voice and charisma that could inspire thousands. He was an outstanding military leader and diplomat who, during his reign, annexed vast territories, nearly all of Western Europe, including lands of modern France, Germany, northern Italy, Belgium, the Netherlands, and significant parts of Central Europe. Charlemagne undertook many military campaigns, subjugating or uniting various peoples and lands under his control. Among the most significant were his campaigns against the Lombards in Italy, the Saxons in northern Germany, and the Moors in Spain. In his campaigns against the Saxons, Charlemagne exhibited not only military might but also political savvy, compelling these tribes to adopt Christianity and fully integrate into his empire. Charlemagne's coronation as emperor became a significant event in the history of medieval Europe. On Christmas Day, December 25, 800, in St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, Pope Leo II placed a crown on Charlemagne's head and declared him emperor. This event symbolized the restoration of imperial authority in the West for the first time since the fall of the Roman Empire. Thus, Charlemagne became the first emperor of Western Europe in several centuries, and his empire laid the foundation for future European states. However, Charlemagne is remembered not only as a conqueror and ruler, but also as an exceptional reformer. He understood that managing such a vast state required clear and effective laws and an administrative system. At his initiative, a wide network of counties was established, governed by counts he appointed. A system of royal envoys was also introduced to monitor local officials and ensure the enforcement of royal decrees. Charlemagne paid particular attention to education and culture. He was a highly educated individual and sought to ensure that his courtiers and clergy were knowledgeable as well. Under his order, schools were opened at monasteries and bishoprics, teaching grammar, rhetoric, arithmetic, geometry, music, and theology. The most notable was the court school in Aachen, led by the English scholar Alcuin, who became one of the most significant thinkers of his time. This period, known as the Carolingian Renaissance, witnessed a revival of ancient heritage, the creation of magnificent new manuscripts, and the development of the unique Carolingian script, minuscule, which served as a precursor to modern lowercase letters. During Charlemagne's reign, architecture also reached new heights. His capital, Aachen, became a center of grand construction. The magnificent palace and the famous pilgrimage chapel, built in the style of Byzantine structures, continue to impress with their grandeur and beauty. It was in Aachen that Charlemagne spent a significant part of his reign, making the city an important center of political and cultural life in Europe. Charlemagne passed away in 814, leaving behind a vast legacy. The empire that united many peoples was soon divided among his descendants by the Treaty of Verdun in 843 into three parts, laying the groundwork for future European states: France, Germany, and Italy. After the division of Charlemagne's empire, feudalism in France was distributed among his grandsons, according to the Treaty of Verdun in 843, and the territory of modern France went to the western part, known as the West Frankish Kingdom. This moment became a key step in the formation of France as an independent state and marked the beginning of a new era, the era of feudalism. Feudalism became a logical continuation of the system of governance established under the Carolingians. However, now, in the context of political, due to fragmentation and weak central authority, local rulers like counts and dukes gained significant autonomy. The king's power gradually lost its former influence, and in some regions, feudal lords became almost independent princes, creating their own small but powerful states. This fragmentation led to constant internal conflicts among the feudal lords. Almost every major lord sought to strengthen his influence, expand his lands, and increase his power at the expense of neighbors. France at that time resembled a mosaic of hundreds of castles, fortresses, and estates, each with its own army and system of governance. Feudal relationships were based on a system of vassalage. The king, or a major feudal lord called the suzerain, granted land and protection to his vassals, who, in return, swore loyalty and were obliged to provide military assistance. Land became the primary source of power and wealth, and the lord's castle became the center of local life. However, this fragmentation, seemingly a weakness at first, allowed for the emergence of a unique culture of chivalry. Knights became more than just warriors. They formed a distinct social class with their own traditions, etiquette, and heroic ideals. A cult of honor and personal valor arose, laying the foundation for all medieval culture and literature in France. Against the backdrop of ongoing conflicts and the decline of the last Carolingian kings, by the late 10th century, France required a new strong dynasty capable of uniting the fragmented territories. In 987, a member of the noble family, Hugh Capet, became the new king of France. Thus began the Capetian era, a dynasty that would rule the country for over 300 years, strengthening its unity and transforming royal power into a real force. Hugh Capet wasn't the most powerful or wealthiest among the French feudal lords. His ascension to the throne was a compromise solution by the nobility, which saw him as weak enough not to threaten their power. However, contrary to expectations, the Capetians proved capable not only of holding the throne, but also of gradually increasing the king's influence over local lords. The Capetians displayed remarkable political talent and persistence, slowly and patiently consolidating their power. They skillfully used marriages and dynastic alliances to expand their domains and influence. Kings sought the church's support, providing it with patronage, land, and privileges. Furthermore, they focused on strengthening the authority of the royal power through the creation of an effective administrative system. One of the key achievements of the Capetians was establishing the principle of crown inheritance from father to son. Unlike the Merovingians and Carolingians, where the state was regularly divided among heirs, the Capetians managed to establish a stable succession to the throne in a direct male line. This principle played a crucial role in the gradual strengthening of central authority and state unity in France. Under the Capetians, Paris finally became the capital of the French kingdom. The city began to develop actively, with new fortifications, churches, and monasteries being built, soon transforming Paris into the largest cultural and political center of the country. At the same time, the famous Abbey of Saint-Denis was founded, becoming the burial place for French kings. However, the strengthening of the king's power didn't happen quickly or easily. Throughout the 10th and 11th centuries, the French were forced to engage in constant struggles with powerful vassals like the Dukes of Normandy, Aquitaine, Burgundy, and the Counts of Champagne. Many of them possessed even greater wealth and military strength than the king himself. The relationships with the Dukes of Normandy were particularly dramatic, as they became kings of England in the 11th century. This period was marked by long conflicts and wars that would eventually lead to the well-known 100 Years' War. Nevertheless, step by step, the kings of the Capetian dynasty strengthened their authority and influence. Under Philip I, Louis VI, and Louis VII, central power significantly increased, with the famous Philip II Augustus, who ruled in the late 12th and early 13th centuries. The kingdom finally became a powerful and unified state. By the early 13th century, medieval France was a country where chivalric culture and feudal traditions thrived. It was in France that a unique phenomenon emerged, greatly impacting the history of Europe and the Middle East and forever changing people's views on religion, heroism, and adventure. This phenomenon was the Crusades. In 1095, Pope Urban II called on all Christians to head east to liberate the Holy Land and the city of Jerusalem from Muslim control. This appeal occurred in the French city of Clermont. French knights were the first and most active to respond to this call, becoming the main driving force behind the First Crusade. The Crusades were not only religious wars. For many French knights, it was both a spiritual deed and an opportunity to gain wealth and glory, as well as a test of their valor and bravery. Participation in a crusade was considered a holy task. Knights believed that this way they would atone for their sins and receive forgiveness for their misdeeds. The First Crusade began in 1096 and turned into a grand military undertaking involving thousands of knights and tens of thousands of foot soldiers, common people, peasants, and craftsmen united in the desire to liberate Jerusalem. Among the leaders of the campaign were noble French knights and lords, such as Count Raymond of Toulouse, Godfrey of Bouillon, his brother Baldwin, Count Robert of Normandy, and many others. Their authority, wealth, and strength attracted many warriors from across Europe. French knights showed incredible bravery and determination in battle. In 1099, they succeeded in capturing Jerusalem. The city's capture was accompanied by a brutal massacre, which contemporaries recalled with horror. But for the Crusaders, it was a glorious victory, perceived as a divine mandate and realization of their mission. After capturing Jerusalem, French knights established several Christian states in the Holy Land, with the Kingdom of Jerusalem becoming the most prominent. The French became the rulers of most of these territories, developing their administrative system, strengthening fortifications, and founding monastic knightly orders like the Templars and Hospitallers. These orders became key elements of life in the Crusader states, playing a significant role in both defense and the development of the region's economy and culture. However, holding on to the conquered lands proved significantly more difficult than capturing them. Over the next few decades, French knights faced constant attacks from Muslim forces, leading to new crusades aimed at strengthening or restoring Christian states in the East. The Second Crusade, which occurred from 1147 to 1149, led by French King Louis VI and German Emperor Conrad II, ended in failure, resulting in significant losses among the Crusaders. This dealt a serious blow to European society and chivalric ideals. Nevertheless, the Third Crusade, taking place from 1189 to 1192, involving King Philip Augustus, became the most famous, although he soon returned to France due to a conflict with the English King Richard the Lionheart. This campaign reaffirmed the leading role of French monarchs and knights in the struggle for the Holy Land. The most dramatic and simultaneously tragic event was the Fourth Crusade, which took place from 1202 to 1204. Instead of moving toward Jerusalem, the Crusaders captured the Christian Constantinople, shocking the entire Christian world. French knights also participated in subsequent campaigns, including the famous campaigns of King Louis IX Saint, who became a symbol of the ideal crusader and was canonized by the Catholic Church. Louis IX undertook two crusades in 1248 and 1270. Both times he faced defeat, but his piety, honesty, and chivalric ideals earned him immense respect and authority across Europe. The Crusades significantly impacted not only the Middle East, but also France itself. They facilitated trade and navigation, connecting Europeans with the East and opening access to new knowledge, technologies, and goods. At the same time, the image of the knight as a defender of faith, hero, and traveler took shape, becoming an integral part of European, especially French, culture. It was in France that the famous legends of the search for the Holy Grail, adventures of noble knights, and tales celebrating valor and selflessness emerged. After the crusading era, when French knights gained fame for their exploits in the East and laid the foundation for a new European culture, France stood on the brink of significant internal changes. During this period, Philip II Augustus and the struggle against the English king helped the kingdom enter a vibrant epoch in its medieval history. Under Philip II Augustus, the country not only solidified its position in Europe, but also experienced a true renaissance, becoming a powerful and prosperous state that neighboring nations respected. Philip II Augustus's reign marked a crucial turning point in France's medieval history. This monarch ruled from 1180 to 1223 and laid the groundwork for a strong and centralized state, significantly expanding its territory and strengthening royal power. He ascended to the throne at a very young age, just 15. Nevertheless, from the first days of his rule, he proved to be a talented and determined leader. One of his key tasks was to restore the crown's authority, which had been severely undermined by powerful feudal lords. The conflict with the Dukes of Normandy, who also ruled the English throne and vast territories in France, was particularly acute. Philip Augustus acted cautiously and patiently, gradually reclaiming lands under the control of the French kingdom. His first major success was the conquest of Artois, followed by other conquests in northern France. However, a true turning point in relations with England, and one of Philip's greatest achievements, was his victory over King John Lackland in 1214 at the Battle of Bouvines. This battle became one of the most significant moments of the Middle Ages, after which England lost much of its possessions in France. This victory allowed Philip Augustus to significantly expand France's territory, strengthen its unity, and enhance the royal authority. After his victory at Bouvines, the king was able to consolidate control over major regions like Normandy, Brittany, Anjou, and Touraine. These lands became direct royal possessions, greatly strengthening central authority and allowing the king to manage most of France directly. Philip II Augustus recognized the importance of effective governance, leading to the formation of an extensive administrative system. He established the position of bailiff, royal officials responsible for tax collection, administering justice, and maintaining local order. Bailiffs became the king's direct representatives in the regions, which weakened the influence of local feudal lords and created a control system subordinate to a single center. Paris became the capital of France, and a significant event of Philip II Augustus's reign was its strengthening as the capital of the French kingdom. Under him, Paris experienced a period of flourishing, transforming from a small town into the largest center of European culture, trade, and science. The king ordered the city to be surrounded by a powerful wall, built new bridges and streets, and established markets and trading squares that attracted merchants from all over Europe. The capital became an essential political, cultural, and economic center of Europe, surpassing other cities on the continent in importance. Philip Augustus supported the construction of Gothic cathedrals and fortifications. During his reign, the construction of Notre Dame Cathedral began, which became an important symbol of medieval France. A famous fortress was also built to protect the royal treasures and the king himself. France's economic prosperity under Philip II was linked to the development of cities, crafts, and trade. The king granted cities numerous privileges, freeing townspeople from the power of local feudal lords and granting them the right to self-governance. This fostered urban population growth, the development of crafts and trade, bringing significant revenue to the treasury and strengthening royal power. Philip Augustus paid particular attention to trade with other countries, especially Flanders, Italy, and the Middle Eastern states. He encouraged fairs that gathered thousands of merchants and craftsmen, becoming vital centers of Europe's economic life. French cities like Paris, Lyon, Orléans, and Chartres thrived thanks to these fairs, becoming wealthier and more influential. The reign of Philip II Augustus opened a new chapter, not only in the history of French statehood, but also in the culture of France. His reign marked the beginning of the Gothic era, which transformed European cities and left an indelible mark on art and architecture. Gothic architecture emerged in France in the 10th century and epitomized a new style that reached for the heavens and was filled with light. While the earlier Romanesque style was characterized by massive and heavy forms, Gothic architecture brought lightness and elegance. Tall pointed arches, elegant stained glass windows, and soaring towers became distinctive features of this new direction. One of the most famous symbols of the Gothic era became the cathedral dedicated to Notre Dame, known worldwide. The construction of this majestic temple began in 1163 at the initiative of Bishop Maurice de Sully and lasted nearly 2 centuries. The cathedral was built in the heart of Paris on the Ile de la Cité, where the main events of French history occurred for centuries. Notre Dame embodied the best traditions of Gothic style. Its majestic facade with 2 towers and a central rose window, along with unique sculptural compositions, impressed contemporaries and remains iconic for Paris. The high-pointed arches and vast stained glass windows depicting scenes from the lives of saints filled the temple with streams of colored light, creating an atmosphere of spiritual uplift and a mystical union with the divine. This effect held special significance for medieval people who viewed it as a manifestation of divine power. Notre Dame wasn't just a spiritual center. It was also a cultural hub in Paris, hosting major church and state ceremonies, coronations, festivals, church councils, and public gatherings. The cathedral witnessed many significant events in French history over the centuries. However, the Cathedral of Notre Dame was merely one of many Gothic masterpieces built in various cities across France. Medieval France featured a network of majestic cathedrals, particularly in Chartres, Reims, Amiens, and Rouen. These cities competed to outdo each other in the grandeur of their temples, striving to surpass in tower height, facade beauty, and intricate sculptural compositions. For instance, Chartres Cathedral was famous for its unique stained glass, still astounding viewers with its vibrant colors and elegant designs. The Gothic era transformed not only the outward appearance of cities, but also their inner lives. Medieval towns became vital economic and cultural centers, attracting merchants, craftsmen, students, and intellectuals. This period saw active development of urban communities that gained self-governing rights. City authorities focused on improving infrastructure, organizing markets and fairs, which fostered trade and craftsmanship growth. With urban expansion came the rise of universities, centers of intellectual life in medieval Europe. The most renowned and influential among them became the University of Paris, later known as the Sorbonne. Founded around 1257 by theologian Robert de Sorbonne as a college for poor theology students, it quickly became the leading educational institution in Europe, drawing students and professors from across the continent. The Sorbonne produced many outstanding scholars, philosophers, and theologians, such as Thomas Aquinas, Albert the Great, and Roger Bacon, whose works profoundly influenced the development of European thought and science. The university offered theology, philosophy, law, medicine, and liberal arts, making it a crucial center of intellectual life in Europe. Another feature of medieval urban culture in France was literature. The Gothic era coincided with the flourishing of chivalric romances, courtly poetry, and epic poems. Writers like Chrétien de Troyes crafted works that became classics of European literature. They told stories of the Knights of the Round Table, quests for the Holy Grail, and themes of lofty love and loyalty that shaped ideals of honor and nobility in medieval culture. French cities turned into true centers of culture and public life. Citizens organized theatrical performances, mysteries, and carnivals, gathering thousands of spectators. These mass events helped establish a new urban culture based on unity, celebration, and shared traditions. However, in the 10th century, the era of prosperity and cultural flourishing in France began to fade, giving way to more troubled times. The country stood on the brink of one of the longest and most destructive conflicts in its history, the 100 Years' War with England. This military conflict lasted 116 years, from 1330 to 1453, profoundly affecting the fates of both countries and all of Europe. The reasons for the war were complex, and rooted in the deep medieval past. The primary cause was the dispute over claims to the French throne after the direct line of the Capetians ceased in 1328. The last king of this dynasty, Charles IV, died without direct heirs. English King Edward II, being the closest relative through the female line, laid claim to the French throne. However, the French nobility rejected his claims and chose Philip VI of the House of Valois as the new king. This decision led to a deep conflict between the two kingdoms, which soon escalated into open warfare. Besides dynastic reasons, economic factors existed. Both countries sought control over the rich region of Flanders, the center of European textile production and trade. Flanders had strong trade ties with England, but was politically dependent on France, further intensifying the rivalry between the two powers. The early stages of the war were quite successful for the English. In 1346, one of the war's most crucial battles occurred, the Battle of Crécy, where English archers armed with longbows inflicted a severe defeat on the French army, commanded by Philip VI. This battle shocked France and demonstrated the advantages of the English military strategy. Following Crécy, the siege and capture of Calais in 1347 became a crucial English stronghold on the continent, remaining under English control for decades. Then, under Edward, the Black Prince, son of Edward II, the Battle of Poitiers took place in 1356, where French King John II the Good was captured. This event plunged France into a deep crisis and led to internal conflicts. The kingdom was divided, and uprisings among peasants and townspeople began. The country descended into chaos. In 1362, the Treaty of Bretigny concluded the war, granting England vast territories in southwestern France, including Gascony and Poitou. However, this peace was only temporary. At the beginning of the next century, the war resumed with renewed vigor. In 1415, King Henry V of England achieved a famous victory at Agincourt, once again showcasing the superiority of English archers and tactics. After this victory, England controlled much of northern France, and in 1420 the Treaty of Troyes was signed, recognizing the English king as the heir to the French throne. But at this critical moment for France, a miracle occurred: the emergence of Joan of Arc, a simple peasant girl from Lorraine. In 1429, Joan inspired French troops to fight and lifted the siege of Orléans, marking a turning point and restoring hope to the entire nation. Although Joan was soon captured by the English and executed, her heroic deeds remained in the nation's memory. In 1431, the image and courage of this woman inspired the French people to continue their struggle. From that moment on, control of the situation completely shifted to the French. King Charles VI's army gradually reclaimed lost lands, driving out the English. The war ended with the Battle of Castillon in 1453, after which the English suffered a complete defeat. They retained only the port of Calais, which they held until 1558. The consequences of the Hundred Years' War profoundly impacted both countries. Despite significant destruction and heavy losses among the population, France emerged from the conflict renewed and strengthened. The war fostered the development of national consciousness and unity among the French. Royal authority significantly increased, while the influence of feudal lords weakened, paving the way for further centralization of the state. Militarily, the war highlighted the necessity of transitioning from outdated feudal armies to professional troops, marking an important step forward: the establishment of a permanent army. Additionally, warfare methods changed. Artillery and infantry began to replace knights on horseback. While England almost lost all its possessions on the continent, this led to a long period of internal strife, known as the Wars of the Roses. After the Hundred Years' War, France entered an era of significant change and a new cultural renaissance. The country gradually recovered from the heavy consequences of the conflict, regaining strength and aiming for a leading position in Europe. It was during this time that a king took the French throne, playing a key role in shaping a new cultural and political era: Francis I. He ruled from 1515 to 1547 and became one of the most prominent and influential figures of his time. His fame was based not only on his military and diplomatic talents, but also on his status as a patron of arts and humanism, which greatly influenced the culture of all Europe. It was under him that the Renaissance arrived in France, largely inspired by Italian masters and intellectuals. From the beginning of his reign, Francis actively sought to expand France's influence in Italy, leading to numerous conflicts known as the Italian Wars. These military actions held both political and cultural significance. French troops and the royal court directly interacted with the magnificent Italian civilization, which was flourishing. The French aristocracy, military and royal envoys who visited Milan, Venice, Florence, and Rome returned home inspired by the new culture, art, and humanist ideas. The king was so impressed by the Italian Renaissance that he began inviting the greatest masters of the time to France. Among them, Leonardo da Vinci stood out, personally invited by the king. Leonardo arrived in France in 1516 and settled in the Château du Clos-Lucé near Amboise, where he spent his final years. The king provided the artist with complete freedom and favorable conditions for creativity. It was in France that Leonardo completed his famous portrait of the Mona Lisa, which later became one of the most renowned masterpieces of world painting. Francis also invited other outstanding Italian masters, such as Rosso Fiorentino and Francesco Primaticcio, who decorated the royal palace of Fontainebleau with frescoes and decorative compositions. This palace became a symbol of a new French style, combining Italian sophistication and French elegance. Soon the Fontainebleau school, founded under the influence of these Italian artists, emerged as a major center of Renaissance art and architecture in France. The king was interested not only in art, but also in science, literature, and humanist ideas. During his reign, the works of Italian humanists such as Petrarch, Boccaccio, and Machiavelli began to spread widely in France. The king supported the creation of libraries, promoted publishing, and the development of humanist education. One of Francis's main achievements was founding the Collège de France in 1530, the first higher education institution fully dedicated to humanistic studies. The college became an alternative to the traditional Sorbonne and quickly gained a reputation as a major educational center in Europe. Outstanding scholars such as Guillaume Budet, the leading French humanist of his time, and Jacques Lefebvre d'Étaples influenced the intellectual life across the continent, taught there. Francis I also actively engaged in architecture, striving to beautify his country with new magnificent buildings in the spirit of the Italian Renaissance. Under him, the construction and renovation of the famous French castles of Chambord and Chenonceau began, which still amaze with their grandeur and harmony of proportions. Italian architects and artists working at the French court significantly changed the face of French architecture and laid the foundations for the further development of the classical style. However, despite all the cultural successes, the reign of Francis I was marred by numerous wars and conflicts. The Italian wars, while leading to territorial expansion and strengthening France's authority on the European stage, were extremely costly and weakened the country financially. The prolonged confrontation with the Habsburgs, especially with Emperor Charles V, prevented France from solidifying its presence in Italy and forced it to focus on domestic affairs. Nevertheless, the era of Francis I remains a time in French history of unprecedented cultural flourishing and openness to new ideas. The Italian influence that came to France through the king's policies permanently changed French art, architecture, literature, and education. Thanks to Francis I, the French Renaissance became a crucial milestone in the development of not only France, but of European civilization as a whole, laying the groundwork for a cultural flourishing that would continue for centuries. After this period of the French Renaissance's rise and cultural peak under Francis I, France faced deep internal conflicts that fundamentally reshaped its history and societal structure. The era of religious wars began, one of the most dramatic and bloody periods in the country's history, when faith became the reason for years of clashes and discord, dividing the nation into two opposing camps. These conflicts arose from the Reformation, a large-scale movement that began in Europe in the first half of the 16th century. In France, supporters of Protestantism, mainly of the Calvinist branch, began to be called Huguenots. They sought fundamental changes in the church and society, rejecting the authority of the Pope and demanding simplification of church life, a rejection of luxury and ceremonies, and the translation of the Bible into accessible languages. Many members of the French nobility and urban population became Huguenots, seeking to rid themselves of the Catholic Church's influence and strengthen their independence from royal power. However, the Catholic majority in France viewed the spread of Protestantism with hostility and concern. Kings and the court elite saw Huguenots as a threat to state stability, while the Catholic Church viewed it as a danger to its influence and authority. Gradually, religious disagreements became increasingly sharp and politicized, leading to bursts of violence and repression. The religious wars began in 1562 with the bloody massacre at Versailles, when Catholic soldiers attacked unarmed Huguenots gathered for worship. This event marked the starting point for a series of armed confrontations that engulfed France for more than 30 years. The culmination of the confrontation between religious factions was the terrible night that occurred on August 24, 1572. It all began in Paris when, on the orders of Catherine de' Medici, the Queen Mother, a mass extermination of Huguenot leaders took place, which quickly led to a massacre throughout the country. Over the following weeks, tens of thousands of Huguenots were killed, including both nobles and commoners, craftsmen and peasants. This bloodshed became a symbol of religious intolerance and brutality that shocked all of Europe. After these events, the conflict grew even more fierce. Huguenots, despite huge losses, continued to fight for their rights and faith. Their leader and symbol of resistance became Henry of Navarre, a talented military commander from the Protestant branch of the Bourbon royal lineage. Throughout the long conflicts and political intrigues, he played a key role in ending the religious wars. In 1589, after the death of the last king from the dynasty, Valois, Henry became the heir to the French throne. However, he faced a complex task. Most of the population remained Catholic and refused to accept a Protestant monarch. Understanding this, Henry made a decision and publicly converted to Catholicism in 1593, famously stating, "Paris is worth a mass." A year later, he ascended the throne as Henry IV. Yet, Henry didn't forget about his fellow Protestants. To reconcile Catholics and Protestants and end years of conflict, he issued the famous Edict of Nantes in 1598. This document first recognized the Huguenots' right to freedom of worship and granted them important political and religious freedoms, thus establishing the principle of religious tolerance and ending the bloodshed. Despite the official reconciliation, the aftermath of the religious wars weighed heavily on the country. France lost hundreds of thousands of people, many cities were destroyed, and the economy declined, leaving society deeply divided. Nevertheless, the religious wars highlighted the dangers of fanaticism and the need for compromise between state and religion. France's experience became a vital lesson for all of Europe. These events significantly influenced the country's cultural and social life. The tragedy of the St. Bartholomew's Night resonated in numerous literary and artistic works, serving as a lasting reminder of the horrors religious intolerance can cause. The religious wars also spurred the development of political ideas. The principles of religious tolerance, freedom of conscience, and human rights were actively discussed, setting the stage for future political and social reforms. After the dramatic era of religious wars and internal division, France gradually began to restore unity and stability. In these conditions, the royal authority strengthened, aiming to avoid a repeat of past conflicts. This desire led to the flourishing of absolutism, where all power concentrated in the hands of the monarch. The pinnacle of French absolutism occurred during the reign of Louis XIV, known as the Sun King, who ruled from 1643 to 1715. He forever remained in history as a symbol of absolute monarchy. Having experienced the upheavals of the Fronde, the aristocratic rebellion against royal authority, he recognized the need for a strong centralized power to ensure stability. Once he became the absolute ruler, he declared, "L'État, c'est moi," reflecting the core idea of absolutism, the complete identification of the state with the king's personality. The Grand Palace of Versailles, located near Paris, became the symbol and embodiment of Louis XIV's absolute power. Originally a small hunting lodge, it was transformed into an incredibly luxurious palace with parks, fountains, and magnificent halls under Louis XIV. Outstanding architects and artists of the time, such as Louis Levaux, Jules Hardouin-Mansart, artist Charles Lebrun, and the famous gardener André Le Nôtre, contributed to the construction and decoration of Versailles. Versailles became not just a royal residence, but also the center of political and cultural life in Europe. Louis XIV moved his court to Versailles to keep the nobility under control and prevent a repeat of the Fronde. The court created an atmosphere of luxury and strict etiquette, designed to keep the nobility immersed in endless court ceremonies and festivities, preventing them from contemplating political influence. The court of Versailles became a model for other European monarchies, many of which sought to imitate the French style. Louis XIV understood the importance of promoting his power, so everything from grand portraits and interiors to court ceremonies served a single purpose: strengthening the king's authority as an omnipotent ruler whose will was law. However, Louis XIV's reign is remembered not only for the luxury and splendor of Versailles. It was during his time that France experienced a powerful economic and cultural rise. The king actively supported the development of industry, trade, and infrastructure. His finance minister, Jean-Baptiste Colbert, pursued a mercantilist policy aimed at strengthening the national economy and expanding foreign trade. Louis XIV also paid great attention to culture and the arts, being a patron of many prominent figures of his time, such as playwright Molière, composer Jean-Baptiste Lully, and artists Nicolas Poussin and Charles Lebrun. Theater, opera, ballet, and music flourished at his court. During Louis XIV's era, the style of French classicism fully formed, becoming dominant in Europe for many years. He also focused on strengthening the army and expanding the nation's territory, waging many wars such as the Wars of the Spanish Succession and the Dutch Wars, seeking to establish France as a leading European power. Despite some successes in these conflicts, they proved extremely costly and drained the nation's economy. Not all of Louis XIV's actions were successful. His revocation of the Edict of Nantes in 1685, which guaranteed rights to Huguenots, triggered a mass emigration of Protestants from France, causing significant economic and intellectual damage. The final years of his reign were overshadowed by heavy wars, financial difficulties, and public discontent. Nevertheless, the Sun King left behind a colossal legacy that forever changed France and Europe. His reign entered history as the golden age of French absolutism, when the monarch's power reached its peak and French culture and art flourished. Thus, Louis XIV's rule was a time of contrasts and paradoxes, an era of unprecedented grandeur and luxury, but also a time of brutal wars, deep social contradictions, and economic challenges. Despite all the contradictions, it was during this time that France emerged as a powerful centralized state and cultural capital of Europe, symbolized by Louis XIV, the embodiment of absolute monarchy. Over time, significant changes began in France, a nation characterized by extensive monarchical luxury, the opulence of the Palace of Versailles, strict etiquette rules, and the king's seemingly unshakable power soon began to raise serious questions and criticism in society. Thus began the Age of Enlightenment, when blind obedience to authority gave way to faith in reason, science, and progress. This period became a time of deep reflections on the essence of humanity, society, and power. Thinkers and Enlightenment figures sought explanations for the world, relying solely on reason and experience, rejecting outdated dogmas and prejudices. It was in France that Enlightenment ideas gained particular prominence, and the philosophers, writers, and scientists of this era became authorities whose opinions mattered to all of Europe. One of the most influential philosophers was François-Marie Arouet, better known as Voltaire. He was a sharp-minded individual, bold and independent in his views. His life was full of events, scandals, and conflicts with authorities. Once, for his sharp satirical verses against Regent Philippe d'Orléans, he found himself in the Bastille. This imprisonment prompted Voltaire to reflect on resistance to tyranny and oppression. Later, after a conflict with an influential aristocrat, he emigrated to England, where he was impressed by the Parliament and the freedoms that seemed remarkable compared to French absolutism. England inspired him to write philosophical letters, published in 1734, which posed a challenge to French society. Voltaire praised the English, freedom, criticized religious intolerance, arbitrary royal power, and the backwardness of French institutions. The book was banned in France, and its copies were burned, but the ban only increased Voltaire's popularity and his ideas. Voltaire was also an outstanding writer. His works, such as Candide and Optimism, mocked the naive belief in an ideal and just nature of the world. In his writings, he sharply criticized both monarchy and the church, accusing it of ignorance and cruelty. He was a fierce advocate for free speech, religious tolerance, and human rights. He is attributed with the famous phrase, "I disapprove of what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it," which became a symbol of the struggle for freedom of opinion. Other significant thinkers of the era included Jean-Jacques Rousseau and Charles-Louis de Montesquieu. Unlike Voltaire, Rousseau came from a poor family and worked as a musician, teacher, and secretary for a long time. He gained fame with his treatise, Discourse on the Arts and Sciences, where he argued that civilization and progress had distorted human nature, moving people away from their natural state of freedom. Rousseau idealized humans in their natural state, believing that before the advent of private property, people were free and happy. In his key work, The Social Contract, published in 1762, he presented the groundbreaking idea that legitimate power is based on the consent of the people, and only society as a whole can be sovereign. This thought became the foundation for many revolutions and declarations of human rights. Rousseau also significantly influenced educational thought with his book Émile, or On Education, where he called for raising children according to their natural inclinations and needs. Charles-Louis de Montesquieu, the third major philosopher of this era, came from an aristocratic family and worked in the legal field for a long time. His main work, The Spirit of the Laws, published in 1748, forever changed Europe's political philosophy. He first formulated the concept of separation of powers into legislative, executive, and judicial branches to prevent despotism. Montesquieu not only described but also proposed a practical model of government that later formed the basis for the Constitution of the United States and influenced constitutional reforms in France and other European countries. He traveled extensively, studied English justice and various political systems, making his works compelling and well-argued. Besides philosophical ideas, the Enlightenment era is remembered for creating a famous encyclopedia that became a symbol of the time. This grand project, led by philosopher Denis Diderot and mathematician Jean d'Alembert, aimed to gather all available knowledge of humanity and make it understandable for a wider audience. Hundreds of prominent scientists and writers participated in creating the encyclopedia, including Voltaire, Rousseau, and Montesquieu. The encyclopedia became not only a symbol of the era, but also an important tool for spreading new ideas and knowledge. Despite severe censorship and pressure from authorities, the encyclopedists continued their work, greatly influencing public consciousness. The Enlightenment laid the groundwork for large-scale historical changes. Ideas that emerged during this period became the foundation for the French Revolution and entered modern democratic culture, including freedom of speech and the press, principles of human rights and civil liberties, separation of powers, and the concept of the social contract. All of this is the legacy of Enlightenment philosophers who changed not only France, but the entire world. After the Enlightenment, as the ideas of freedom, equality, and justice spread throughout France and captivated the minds of a broad segment of society, the country rapidly approached a revolutionary crisis. Amidst intellectual growth, unresolved issues loomed large, accumulated over decades, and creating conditions for social change. These issues boiled down to two key reasons: deep social inequality and severe economic hardships. By the end of the 18th century, France remained a country with a rigid class structure, divided into three well-defined estates: the clergy, the nobility, and the third estate, which included the bourgeoisie, urban artisans, and the overwhelming majority of peasants. The first two estates, despite their small numbers, owned most of the land wealth and enjoyed numerous privileges, exempting themselves from most taxes. This unjust distribution of rights and responsibilities became the main source of discontent among the Third Estate. Peasants, making up over 80% of France's population, bore the burden of taxes, feudal obligations, and church tithes. The situation worsened as they were also required to perform labor duties, remnants from the Middle Ages that were viewed as outdated. The bourgeoisie, consisting of urban entrepreneurs, merchants, and educated members of the Third Estate, also experienced dissatisfaction with the existing order. Despite their significant role in economic life, they were almost entirely devoid of political influence and equal rights with the nobility. This caused irritation, as they couldn't participate in government despite having considerable capital and education, often having to submit to an aristocracy that was less competent and less educated. Thus, by the end of the 18th century, France found itself divided into two opposing worlds: the world of luxurious palaces filled with idle nobility, and the world of poverty and unbearable labor. Peasants and the lower classes of urban populations faced daily shortages of resources, hunger, and injustice. This social contradiction continually intensified, creating tension within society and making revolution inevitable. However, inequality was only one side of a multifaceted problem. Another equally significant cause of the revolutionary crisis was the economic hardships that reached catastrophic proportions in the decades leading up to the revolution. France's economy faced a severe financial crisis caused by both internal and external factors. The enormous expenses of the state, linked to the luxury of the royal court and ongoing wars, such as the 7 Years' War and France's involvement in the American War of Independence, drained the treasury. The national debt rose to unprecedented levels, forcing the government to continually increase the tax burden on the population. The situation worsened with poor harvests that swept across the country at the end of the 18th century. The year 1789 was particularly harsh, as unfavorable weather conditions led to a complete crop failure. Prices for bread, a staple food, soared, and many regions experienced real famine. Discontent among the poorest segments of the population became widespread and dangerous, leading to riots and uprisings across the country. The royal authority proved incapable of adequately responding to these challenges. Efforts by King Louis XVI and his ministers to implement reforms and increase taxes on privileged estates faced stiff resistance from the nobility and clergy, who were unwilling to part with their privileges. The Estates General convened in 1789 instead of solving issues highlighted the depth of disagreements and the crisis of authority. By the end of the 18th century, France found itself in a state of deep crisis. On one hand, blatant social inequality and injustice sparked mass discontent, while on the other, severe economic difficulties and ineffective governance exacerbated the situation. Society, inspired by Enlightenment ideas about equality and justice, could no longer tolerate the existing order and demanded change. By the time France approached the moment of storming the Bastille, it was on the brink of a deep social and economic crisis, and events started to unfold rapidly. The tension that had accumulated over many years reached its peak in the summer of 1789. The storming of the Bastille on July 14, 1789, marked the beginning of the French Revolution. The Bastille, a medieval fortress in the heart of Paris, symbolized royal tyranny and oppression. Although by the late 18th century it housed only a few prisoners, it remained a sinister symbol of absolute monarchy in the eyes of Parisians. The storming of the Bastille was not just a symbolic act against despotism, but also the real start of the revolution. The uprising people, armed and rising against royal troops, captured the fortress after a fierce battle. This event demonstrated that the power of the monarchy was no longer absolute, and that the people were ready to take their fate into their own hands. The following months and years became a time of enormous change. The royal authority quickly lost credibility. King Louis XVI, unable to control the situation, had to comply with the decisions of the National Assembly formed by revolutionaries. After a failed escape attempt in 1791, his reputation was permanently damaged. Louis XVI was placed under house arrest and stripped of nearly all power. Meanwhile, the revolution grew increasingly radical. In 1792, the First French Republic was proclaimed. The monarchy was officially abolished. Louis XVI was accused of treason and brought to trial. His trial became one of the most dramatic events of the revolution, demonstrating a definitive break with the past. On January 21, 1793, the king was executed by guillotine at the Place de la Révolution, now known as Place de la Concorde, in front of a huge crowd that watched the event with excitement and joy. The king's execution became a symbolic act, marking the end of the monarchy and the complete establishment of new revolutionary power. However, after Louis XVI's death, France did not find peace. On the contrary, the revolution entered its most radical and bloody phase, known as the period of Jacobin dictatorship. During this radical stage of the revolution, the Jacobins, members of the most revolutionary and influential club, advocated for immediate deep reforms and the destruction of all opponents of the revolution. Their leader was Maximilien Robespierre, a lawyer, politician, and orator known for his uncompromising stance and fanatical loyalty to revolutionary ideals. Robespierre dreamed of creating a new France based on the principles of republican morality, equality, and justice. However, his methods proved to be extremely harsh and repressive. Under his leadership, a period known as the Reign of Terror began. Thousands suspected of disloyalty to the revolution faced execution, many guilty only of not sharing the radical views of the Jacobins. The guillotine became a terrifying symbol of this era. Executions took place almost daily, and the atmosphere in society filled with fear and suspicion. Robespierre sincerely believed that terror was necessary to protect the revolution from internal and external enemies. But gradually, fear, repression, and lack of stability caused discontent, even among Jacobin supporters. Soon, Robespierre himself became a victim of the system he created. On July 27, 1794, known as the 9th of Thermidor, Robespierre and his close associates were arrested and executed by guillotine the next day, becoming the last victims of the Reign of Terror. The fall of Robespierre marked the end of the radical phase of the revolution. France, weary of violence and endless repression, sought stability and order. A more moderate authority known as the Directory gradually established itself in the country, trying to return society to normal life by easing revolutionary radicalism and halting mass executions. Nonetheless, despite the bloody events of the Reign of Terror, the period of Jacobin dictatorship held immense historical significance. It demonstrated the dangers of radicalism and intolerance, but at the same time, the radical transformations carried out by the Jacobins forever changed French society. The remnants of feudalism were abolished, principles of equality before the law were proclaimed, large-scale secularization of society began, and reforms in education were initiated. After the dramatic events of the French Revolution, the execution of Louis XVI, and the period of Jacobin terror, France and all of Europe never returned to the previous order. The revolution, which began as a struggle for freedom and equality, led not only to profound internal changes, but also had a significant impact on political and social processes around the world. The most obvious result of the French Revolution was the definitive destruction of absolute monarchy and the feudal system. The privileges of the nobility and clergy were abolished, leading to the dismantling of feudal structures and reinforcing the idea of equality before the law for all citizens. French society ceased to be strictly hierarchical, opening new opportunities for the bourgeois middle class, which became the main driving force of the economy and politics. The adoption of the famous Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen in August 1789 became a key achievement of the revolution. This document proclaimed the fundamental rights and freedoms of every person: freedom of speech, press, assembly, the right to property, security, and resistance to oppression. Human rights became the foundation of the modern legal state, inspiring subsequent generations to create constitutions and declarations of human rights worldwide. One significant consequence of the revolution was the extensive secularization of society in France. The influence of the Catholic Church, which had held a key position in the life of the country for centuries, was significantly weakened. Church lands were nationalized, monasteries closed, and the clergy came under state control. For the first time in history, France proclaimed the principles of a secular state, separating church from state and significantly limiting the influence of religion on daily life. The economic consequences of the revolution were quite contradictory. On one hand, the abolition of feudal obligations and the creation of a unified national market made the economy more dynamic, promoting trade and industry growth. However, on the other hand, years of revolutionary disorder, terror, and endless wars severely undermined the country's economic stability, causing inflation and economic difficulties whose effects were felt for many years. The revolution also radically transformed France's political structure. Absolute monarchy gave way to a republic, then dictatorship, and later the authoritarian rule of Napoleon Bonaparte. In a short time, France experienced several sharp changes of power and political regimes, which became a unique experience for Europe at the time. One of the key consequences of the revolution was the formation of mass politics. For the first time, a wide range of the population, including peasants, artisans, workers, and the middle class, became actively engaged in the political life of the country. Numerous political clubs and organizations emerged, fostering the birth of a modern political culture based on active citizen participation in state affairs. The French Revolution had a massive impact on international relations and the political situation in Europe. The ideas of freedom, equality, and popular sovereignty transcended France, resonating in countries across Europe. Monarchs, frightened by revolutionary events, began to strengthen control and repression, seeking to suppress any attempts to replicate the French experience. At the same time, many nations viewed the French Revolution as a symbol of the fight for freedom and equality. They began to actively resist feudalism and absolutism in their own countries. A particularly significant consequence of the revolution was the Napoleonic Wars, which spread across almost all of Europe and beyond. Napoleon Bonaparte, who became France's leader after the revolution, sought to spread its ideas and his power throughout Europe. Though his empire was ultimately destroyed, the Napoleonic Wars undermined the old feudal order and created conditions for modern nation-states to emerge. Moreover, the French Revolution greatly impacted the cultural and educational spheres. The principles of enlightenment that formed the foundation of the revolution spurred the development of mass education, increased literacy, and expanded scientific knowledge. Society became more open and educated, with broader access to education for many people. After the tumultuous events of the revolution and bloody repressions, France found itself in a deep political crisis. The country needed a strong leader to restore order and bring stability after years of turmoil and destruction. At this moment, Napoleon Bonaparte emerged on the historical stage, symbolizing a new era. Napoleon was born on August 15, 1769, in Corsica to a minor noble family. From a young age, he showed ambition, intelligence, and determination. After receiving military education in France, he quickly distinguished himself from his peers with his strategic abilities and drive for victory. His first opportunity to prove himself came during the Revolution. In 1793, he led the artillery assault on Toulon, where British and Royalist forces were stationed. Through bold and unconventional actions, Napoleon achieved a decisive victory, earning recognition from revolutionary leaders and launching his rapid career. The next key moment in the young general's fate was fighting against the Royalist uprising in Paris in 1795. Napoleon decisively crushed the rebellion, ordering the use of grape shot against the rioters. This event solidified his reputation as a talented military leader capable of maintaining order in the country. In 1796, Napoleon took command of the French army in Italy. Despite resource shortages and supply issues, he displayed exceptional military prowess. In just a few months, he defeated superior Austrian forces, conquered northern Italy, and forced the enemy to negotiate peace. This campaign brought him national fame and made him a hero in France. Alongside military successes, Napoleon skillfully utilized propaganda. He personally wrote appeals and reports about his victories, which were sent to Paris, making him a true idol of the French people. His image as a decisive and brilliant commander spread widely in the press, further bolstering his popularity. Following a triumphant return to France, Napoleon launched a new ambitious operation, the Egyptian campaign in 1798. Aiming to undermine British interests in the East and strengthen France's position in the Mediterranean, he invaded Egypt and won several battles, including the famous battle at the Pyramids. However, this success proved short-lived. Soon, the British fleet under Admiral Nelson destroyed French ships off the coast of Egypt, cutting Napoleon off from home. Despite the difficulties of the Egyptian campaign, he secretly returned to France in 1799, when the country was in chaos and instability. The Directory's political regime had lost public trust. The economy was in decline, and public sentiment continued to worsen. Napoleon seized this crisis, and on November 9, 1799, according to the revolutionary calendar, staged a coup d'état with the support of loyal troops. As a result, the Directory was overthrown, and power shifted to 3 consuls, with Napoleon becoming the first consul and effectively the sole ruler of the country. Napoleon's new regime proved effective, swiftly restoring stability that had long been lacking after years of revolutionary disorder. As the first consul, Napoleon began implementing extensive reforms aimed at strengthening state power and improving governance. He centralized the administrative system, organized the judiciary, streamlined finances, and restored relations with the Catholic Church by signing a concordat in 1801. Napoleon's popularity skyrocketed, and his power became increasingly absolute. On December 2, 1804, in Notre Dame Cathedral, he performed an unprecedented act by crowning himself Emperor of the French, thereby demonstrating complete independence from previous traditions and ending the Republican era in France. Thus, in a very short time, Napoleon made an astonishing journey from an obscure officer to a figure defining the fate of France and Europe. He used revolutionary changes to quickly ascend the social and political ladder, creating a new type of power based not on hereditary rights, but on personal achievements, talents, and charisma. When he came to power, Napoleon understood the need not only to preserve revolutionary gains, but also to structure them into a clear and effective system of governance. In this regard, he began to implement extensive reforms that laid the foundation for modern French statehood and determined the country's future development for many years. Among the most significant transformations initiated by Napoleon were the civil code, the reform of the education system, and a profound reorganization of the army. One of his main accomplishments, which influenced the development of international law, was the Civil Code adopted in 1804. This body of laws unified disparate revolutionary norms and traditional French law into a single, logical, and coherent system accessible to all citizens. The code was based on principles of equality before the law, protection of private property, freedom of conscience, and freedom of contracts. The establishment of a single code was necessary, as prior to its introduction, France had many conflicting laws inherited from previous eras. The civil code made justice more transparent, organized civil and family relations, and clarified inheritance issues, providing stability and predictability in society. A significant new element was the recognition of absolute equality of all citizens before the law and the abolition of class privileges. For the first time in French history, all citizens, regardless of their origin and status, received equal rights and obligations, and private property was guaranteed and protected. The code turned out to be not only revolutionary for its time, but also remarkably enduring. Its provisions became the foundation of civil legislation in many European countries and continue to be applied in legal practice today. Another equally significant reform carried out by Napoleon was a radical overhaul of the education system. He recognized that a strong and stable state could not exist without educated citizens, so he initiated the creation of a new national education system accessible to broader segments of society. Napoleon established a network of lycées, public schools where education was based on strict discipline and a clear curriculum that included not only humanities but also mathematics, natural sciences, history, and physical education. Graduates. Lyceums became highly qualified personnel for civil service and the Army Officer Corps. These institutions operated under strict state control, ensuring high educational quality and uniform standards. Additionally, Napoleon established prestigious higher education institutions like the École Polytechnique and the Polytechnic College, aimed at training the elite of French society. Thanks to educational reform, Napoleon created a layer of educated officials and military specialists, providing effective governance for many years. The army was also a crucial area that Napoleon regarded as key to the state. As a talented commander, he focused on military reform, transforming the French army into a powerful and mobile force capable of successfully confronting superior enemy numbers. Napoleon completely changed the army's recruitment system. Instead of the old practice of conscription, he introduced universal military service, which he perfected since its inception during the Revolution. This allowed for the rapid formation of numerous well-trained troops, ensuring a constant influx of trained reserves. The army became more professional, strictly organized, and equipped with cutting-edge technology of its time. Napoleon implemented a core system of army organization, consisting of autonomous units capable of acting independently, which gave troops mobility and flexibility on the battlefield. A crucial part of the reform was the creation of a general staff and improvement in officer training. The French army became known not only for its discipline and organization, but also for its high morale. Napoleon understood the importance of soldiers' morale and took personal care in supplying and supporting troops, regularly inspecting armies, and maintaining close relationships with soldiers. Military personnel and officers respected their emperor, making the Napoleonic army nearly invincible, capable of executing grand campaigns and achieving victories over numerous opponents. The Napoleonic era was marked by significant internal reforms and an active foreign policy, expressed through numerous military campaigns across Europe. The Napoleonic Wars became some of the most significant and dramatic conflicts in world history, fundamentally altering Europe's political map and laying the groundwork for the modern world. By the early 19th century, France, thanks to Napoleon's genius and the strength of its army, became a dominant power on the continent. The emperor created a vast empire covering much of Europe, controlling Italy, Spain, the Netherlands, Germany, and other territories. However, endless wars drained the country's resources and provoked resistance from conquered peoples, ultimately leading to the downfall of the Napoleonic regime. In 1812, Napoleon executed his most ambitious military operation, the invasion of Russia. This campaign became a turning point for his empire. Napoleon's Grand Army, consisting of over 600,000 soldiers, crossed the border into the Russian Empire in June 1812. Despite initial successes and a victory at the Battle of Borodino, the French failed to achieve a decisive outcome. The Russian army retreated, avoiding a general battle and luring the enemy deeper into its territory. On September 14, 1812, Napoleon entered Moscow, hoping that capturing the ancient capital would force the Russians to negotiate. However, he found an empty and burned city, abandoned by its residents and devoid of resources. Napoleon's expectations were unmet. Alexander V refused to negotiate, and the French army had to begin a difficult retreat. The French retreat from Russia became one of the most tragic chapters in military history. In harsh winter conditions, without adequate supplies and under pressure from Russian troops and partisans, the remnants of the Grand Army were nearly completely destroyed. Of more than 600,000 soldiers, only about 40,000 returned home. This defeat severely undermined Napoleon's military power and prestige, inspiring European powers to unite against him. After the failed campaign in Russia in 1813 and 1814, France faced a powerful coalition of states, including Russia, Britain, Austria, Prussia, and Sweden. The Allies defeated Napoleon in the Battle of Nations at Leipzig in October 1813, forcing French troops to retreat to their borders. In the spring of 1814, coalition forces entered Paris, and Napoleon was compelled to abdicate the throne and go into exile on the island of Elba. However, his story did not end there. In the spring of 1815, he returned to France and regained power for 100 days, thanks to his incredible popularity among the people and the army. But the forces of the European powers quickly united against him, and on June 18, 1815, Napoleon suffered his final defeat at the famous Battle of Waterloo against the combined forces of Britain. After the defeat at Waterloo, Napoleon was definitively overthrown and exiled to the remote island of St. Helena in the Atlantic Ocean. There, he spent the last years of his life, passing away on May 5, 1821. Despite losing power and being in exile, Napoleon left a significant legacy that's hard to overstate. His civil code became the foundation for legislation not only in France, but also in many other countries across Europe and the world. His education system, centralized state administration, and modern military institutions still serve as models for many nations. A key aspect of Napoleon's legacy was his influence on the development of nationalism in Europe. The Napoleonic Wars shattered the old feudal system and awakened a sense of national identity among peoples, leading to the formation of modern nation-states and laying the groundwork for many future political movements. Moreover, thanks to Napoleon's conquests, the ideas of the French Revolution spread across the continent, changing how people viewed rights and freedoms, popular sovereignty, and forms of government. This had a decisive impact on European politics in the 19th century, triggering a wave of revolutions and reforms. Gradually, Napoleon's image became a symbol of an outstanding commander and statesman in world culture. His persona and fate inspired numerous writers, artists, and composers worldwide. After Napoleon's final defeat in 1815, Europe sought to restore stability and order disrupted by revolutions and years of war. To achieve this, the Bourbon dynasty was restored in France, with the younger brother of the executed Louis XVI ascending the throne. The reign of Louis XVIII from 1814 to 1824 is known as the Restoration era. However, despite the return of the old monarchy, France couldn't completely discard the achievements of the Revolution and Napoleon's reforms. The new king had to recognize a constitutional charter that guaranteed basic civil liberties and retained some elements of civil equality. Nevertheless, noble titles and privileges were restored, and the role of the Catholic Church in society was strengthened. In 1824, Louis XVIII was succeeded by his younger brother Charles, who was less willing to compromise, and liberal reforms. He sought to restore the country to its former order, brutally suppressing dissent, tightening censorship, and trying to reverse the achievements of the Revolution. Charles X's policies caused discontent among the French, who had grown accustomed to a certain degree of freedom and equality. Public tension peaked in the summer of 1830, when Charles X's attempt to dissolve the Chamber of Deputies, restrict press freedom, and alter electoral laws led to an uprising known as the July Revolution. For 3 days, from July 27 to July 29, 1830, Parisians erected barricades and engaged in street battles with government troops. As a result of the revolution, Charles' ascent was overthrown and forced to leave the country. However, the July Revolution did not establish a republic. Instead, Louis-Philippe of Orléans, a member of the younger branch of the Bourbon dynasty known as the Orléans line, came to power. Louis-Philippe was proclaimed King of the French, symbolizing a new approach to monarchy based on popular support rather than divine right. His reign from 1830 to 1848 became known as the July Monarchy. This period featured relative liberalism and rapid development of capitalism, trade, and industry in France. However, the new monarchy faced growing social inequality and economic hardship, particularly during the crisis of the 1840s. Louis-Philippe gradually lost popularity. The wealthy bourgeoisie supported his policies, but workers and the poor, facing low wages and harsh living conditions, experienced increasing frustration. Growing discontent was also evident among the intelligentsia, which demanded expanded political freedoms and democratization of society. In February 1848, the February Revolution erupted in France, ultimately overthrowing the monarchy. Starting as a protest against restrictions on political freedoms, the uprising quickly escalated into a large-scale revolution. Louis-Philippe abdicated and fled to Great Britain, while the Second Republic was proclaimed in France. The period of the Second Republic from 1848 to 1852 proved crucial for the country's political development. For the first time in many years, universal male suffrage was introduced, allowing millions of Frenchmen to participate in elections. The Second Republic also attempted to address social issues by creating national workshops to combat unemployment and implementing reforms aimed at improving working-class living conditions. However, the Republic faced serious challenges. The national workshops failed, leading to financial problems and mass riots in June 1848, which were suppressed by the army with considerable difficulty and casualties. Social tension and political instability once again fostered authoritarian sentiments. In December 1848, the President of the Republic was elected as Louis Napoleon Bonaparte, Napoleon Bonaparte's nephew. He enjoyed great popularity due to his name and promises of stability and prosperity. However, Louis Napoleon soon showed that his true goal was not a republic, but his own absolute power. In 1851, he staged a coup, declared himself president for life, and a year later, in 1852, became Emperor Napoleon II, marking the end of the Second Republic. After this, with Louis Napoleon Bonaparte as emperor, a new era in French history began, known as the Second Empire. The reign of Napoleon II was controversial, but left a profound mark on France's history, particularly due to the extensive transformations of Paris that forever changed the capital's appearance. Napoleon II viewed himself not just as a political leader, but also as a great urban planner, wanting to turn Paris into a model city, a symbol of his empire's prosperity. To implement this plan, he appointed the talented and energetic administrator, Baron Georges Haussmann, as the prefect of Paris, responsible for the complete reconstruction of the capital. The reconstruction of Paris, known as Haussmannization, became one of the largest urban planning projects in Europe. Baron Haussmann boldly demolished old narrow streets and neighborhoods, replacing them with wide boulevards, avenues, and squares. He designed the famous boulevards, the Champs-Élysées, and magnificent squares that became symbols of Paris. Spacious parks and gardens, such as the Bois de Boulogne and the Parc Monceau, emerged, providing the city with fresh air and greenery. Besides aesthetic goals, the reconstruction had significant political implications. The wide boulevards facilitated control over the city, making traditional uprisings in narrow streets, characteristic of previous revolutions, impossible. Sanitary conditions improved. Modern sewage and water systems were built, significantly enhancing city dwellers' quality of life and reducing the spread of epidemics. Alongside the capital's transformation, a vigorous modernization of all France occurred. The emperor promoted the development of manufacturing, railway connections, and the financial sector, helping the country become a powerful industrial nation. Paris during the Second Empire became Europe's cultural and economic heart, attracting artists, writers, businessmen, and aristocrats from across the continent. Nevertheless, the Second Empire's achievements in economic and cultural spheres coincided with internal difficulties and failures in international politics. A key event for Napoleon II was the Franco-Prussian War from 1870 to 1871, which became a turning point for France. Napoleon II aimed to strengthen his authority and the empire's status through victory over Prussia, which was rapidly rising under Chancellor Otto von Bismarck. However, the French army proved completely unprepared for the conflict. It suffered from poor organization and lack of equipment, and the command made many critical errors. A crucial moment in the war was the defeat of French troops and the capture of Napoleon II at the Battle of September 2, 1870. This defeat plunged France into a deep crisis. The fall of the empire was announced in Paris, and a republic was established. During this time, Prussian troops encircled the city and began a months-long siege, causing severe suffering among the civilian population. In January 1871, the German Empire was proclaimed, symbolizing humiliation for France. France was forced to sign a harsh peace treaty, conceding Alsace and Lorraine and paying a hefty indemnity. Nonetheless, the people of Paris refused to acknowledge their defeat. In the spring of 1871, a revolt broke out in the capital, known as the Paris Commune. This marked the first example of revolutionary workers' governance in history, proclaiming radical social reforms, the introduction of workers' self-management, free education, separation of church and state, and equal rights for men and women. The Commune lasted for 72 days and was brutally suppressed by government troops in May 1871. The suppression became known as the Bloody Week. Tens of thousands of Commune participants died. Many were executed or sent to hard labor. Despite this, the ideas of the Commune significantly influenced the development of socialist and labor movements worldwide. After the suppression of the Commune, the Third Republic was firmly established. Initially intended as a temporary government, it lasted much longer than its predecessors, from 1870 to 1940. This era marked a time of relative stability, democratic reforms, parliamentary development, and civil rights. After the tumultuous events of the late 19th century, France entered an age later known as the Belle Époque. This period encompassed the last decades of the 19th century and the early 20th century, ending with the onset of World War I. The Belle Époque was characterized by extraordinary cultural flourishing, technological progress, and an optimistic outlook for the future, with Paris recognized as the cultural capital of Europe. A significant symbol of this time was the World Expositions held in Paris in 1889 and 1900. These grand events attracted millions of visitors worldwide, showcasing the era's scientific, technological, and cultural achievements. For the 1889 exposition, the famous Eiffel Tower was constructed, designed by engineer Gustave Eiffel as a temporary structure. Despite initial criticism and negative feedback from Parisians, the tower became a symbol of not only Paris, but also the entire era of progress and modernization. The 1900 exhibition is remembered as one of the largest global expos, featuring the latest advancements in science and technology, from electricity to early automobiles and cinema. It was here that audiences first saw films by the Lumiere brothers, marking the start of a new era in art and entertainment. The Belle Époque also witnessed a cultural boom in Paris. The city experienced a real surge in literature, painting, music, and theater. Cafes and literary salons in Montmartre and the Latin Quarter became meeting places for artists and intellectuals like Pablo Picasso, Amedeo Modigliani, Henri Matisse, and writer Marcel Proust. The French capital became a true magnet for creative minds worldwide, giving rise to new styles and movements: Impressionism, Post-Impressionism, Art Nouveau, and Cubism. Stars like Sarah Bernhardt dazzled in theaters and cabarets, while the famous Moulin Rouge became an emblem of Parisian nightlife and bohemian culture. However, the vibrant and carefree Belle Époque ended in 1914 with the start of World War I. France, alongside Britain and Russia, found itself at the heart of the conflict against Germany and Austria-Hungary. This war became not just a severe test, but also a tragic chapter in the nation's history. France experienced some of the fiercest battles, and the Western Front turned into a brutal arena of trench warfare characterized by endless trenches, shelling, and gas attacks. One of the most harrowing battles was the Battle of Verdun, which lasted nearly all of 1916. Verdun symbolized the resilience and courage of French soldiers who managed to withstand the powerful German assault. The casualties on both sides exceeded 700,000 killed and wounded. But Verdun held its ground, embodying the unyielding spirit of the French people. France played a crucial role in the Allied victory. Despite enormous losses and destruction, the French army showed exceptional resilience and heroism. Marshals and generals like Joseph Joffre, Ferdinand Foch, and Philippe Pétain became national heroes and symbols of resistance against the enemy. France also made significant contributions to diplomatic efforts. uniting allies. Paris became the center of Allied politics, with French diplomats actively working to create an anti-German coalition and bring the United States into the war, which significantly influenced the conflict's outcome. After the United States entered the war in 1917, the Allied victory became nearly inevitable. The end of World War I came with the signing of the armistice on November 11, 1918, marking Germany's defeat and the Allies' triumph. The peace treaty was signed in Versailles in 1919, highlighting France's special role in the post-war organization of Europe. Despite the victory, the war's aftermath was extremely harsh for France. The country lost around 1.5 million soldiers, many regions lay in ruins, and the economy faced a severe crisis. These repercussions left a deep mark on the national psyche and led to new social and political conflicts during the interwar period. After World War I, France found itself in a complicated situation. On one hand, victory brought prestige and status as a great power. On the other, the country faced serious economic, political, and social challenges. During the so-called interwar period from 1918 to 1939, France experienced both a cultural renaissance and a deep economic crisis. In the early years after the war, French society sought to forget the horrors of the front, which manifested in vibrant cultural and social life known as the Roaring Twenties. Paris once again became a hub for artists, writers, and intellectuals from around the world. In the literary cafes of Montparnasse and Saint-Germain-des-Prés, remarkable figures like Ernest Hemingway, F. Scott Fitzgerald, Gertrude Stein, and James Joyce gathered. Surrealism and Dadaism flourished during this time. Works by Salvador Dalí, André Breton, and Marcel Duchamp became symbols of the period. Cinema and music also experienced an era of innovation and popularity. French cinema introduced geniuses like Jean Renoir and Marcel Carnet to the world. Cabaret artists, including Josephine Baker and Maurice Chevalier, became icons of Parisian nightlife. However, along with cultural flourishing, the interwar years were marked by severe economic difficulties. France suffered significant losses in human lives and material resources during World War I, leaving many northern regions in ruins. Inflation, harsh post-war recovery conditions, and then the global economic crisis triggered by the stock market crash in New York in the late 1920s and early 1930s led to a deep economic recession in France, accompanied by rising unemployment, social protests, and political radicalism. The political situation in the country was also unstable. Governments changed frequently, and political parties were fragmented and hostile. Extreme right and left movements intensified, causing clashes in the streets of Paris and other major cities. By the onset of World War II, the country was divided by internal contradictions and weakened. World War II, which began in 1939, became another heavy trial for France. In May 1940, German forces broke through France's defenses, and by June, the country had to sign an armistice. France split into a German-occupied northern part and a formerly independent state in the south with its capital in Vichy. The Vichy regime was led by Marshal Philippe Pétain, a World War I hero respected by some citizens. However, this regime quickly revealed its true nature, collaborating with the Nazis, implementing anti-Semitic policies, and participating in the deportation of Jews and repression of political opponents. The Vichy authorities abandoned republican ideals, replacing the motto liberty, equality, fraternity with work, family, fatherland. Despite the occupation and the collaboration of some French authorities with Germany, a widespread resistance movement quickly emerged in France. Initially, there were scattered groups and individuals who sabotaged German actions, printed underground newspapers, and helped Jews and political refugees hide. Soon, the resistance became more organized and rallied around General Charles de Gaulle, who actively fought against the German occupation and the Vichy regime from London. De Gaulle became a symbol of free France, inspiring people to fight and believe in victory. Under his leadership, military units formed to fight alongside the Allies, and operations like sabotage and reconnaissance took place on French territory. The resistance played a key role in liberating the country, assisting Allied troops during the Normandy landings and subsequent offensives. The liberation of Paris in August 1944 marked the culmination of the resistance's struggle and symbolized the restoration of French dignity. After the capital was freed, the process of rebuilding the French state began, with Charles de Gaulle taking a key position as the leader of the provisional government. After World War II, France found itself in a dire situation. The country was devastated, the economy was shattered, and society was divided. At this moment, Charles de Gaulle, the hero of the French resistance, returned to the forefront, uniting the nation against occupation. His personality and political vision significantly influenced France's development in the second half of the 20th century. After the liberation of Paris, de Gaulle led the provisional government that began restoring the country and its political institutions. He enjoyed immense popularity, but couldn't prevent the resurgence of the traditional French parliamentary system, which he deemed outdated. Frustrated by political disagreements and conflicts, de Gaulle resigned in January 1946, paving the way for the establishment of the Fourth Republic. The Fourth Republic's constitution was adopted in 1946 and effectively restored a parliamentary democracy reminiscent of the Third Republic. The new system proved extremely unstable. Governments constantly changed, suffered from internal disagreements, and couldn't effectively address the country's serious issues. Over 12 years, more than 20 governments came and went, reflecting its inability to ensure stable leadership. The main challenges during this period included economic recovery, decolonization, and the brutal war in Algeria. The colonial issue became particularly acute, causing deep divisions in society and political circles. The Algerian War, which began in 1954, turned into a real political crisis that the Fourth Republic couldn't overcome. The French army, colonists, and nationalists fought for different goals, while a wave of protests and deep contradictions swept through French society. By 1958, the crisis peaked, threatening to escalate into civil war. During this critical time, Charles de Gaulle returned to power, seen as the only figure capable of guiding the country out of crisis and restoring stability. Parliament entrusted de Gaulle with extraordinary powers and tasked him with preparing a new constitution, leading to the creation of the Fifth Republic. The new political structure devised by de Gaulle was approved in a referendum on September 28, 1958, becoming a significant political legacy of the general. It established a presidential model of governance, significantly strengthening the president's powers. The president was now elected by popular vote and gained the right to appoint the prime minister, dissolve parliament, and call referendums. Charles de Gaulle became the first president of the Fifth Republic, serving from 1959 to 1969. During his tenure, he stabilized political life, strengthened France's international position, resolved the complex Algerian issue by granting Algeria independence in 1962, and implemented key economic and social reforms. Under de Gaulle, France became a nuclear power, significantly enhancing its defense capabilities and reclaiming its status as a leading player on the global stage. However, by the late 1960s, his presidency faced serious internal challenges, particularly during the student and labor protests of May 1968, which shook the country and highlighted profound changes in society. Although the protests were suppressed, they undermined de Gaulle's authority. In April 1969, he voluntarily resigned after losing a referendum on administrative reform. Nonetheless, the Fifth Republic established by de Gaulle proved effective and viable, becoming the longest-lasting political system in France since the Revolution. The Fifth Republic's constitution still defines the country's political life today, combining the stability of presidential power with democratic principles. The parliamentary systems of the Fourth and Fifth Republics marked a significant and controversial phase in French history. They were characterized by both crises and instability, as well as important reforms and achievements on the international stage. The importance of Charles de Gaulle during this time is hard to overstate. His personal qualities, determination, and political vision were crucial in overcoming difficult periods, creating a stable political structure, and restoring France's leading position in the global community. After his departure, the country entered the era of stability in the Fifth Republic, marked by a series of vibrant presidential terms, each contributing to the nation's development while facing unique challenges. The first socialist president was François Mitterrand, elected in 1981 and remaining in office until 1995. His election marked a real political revolution, as the left coalition, led by the Socialist Party, came to power for the first time in decades. Mitterrand's presidency was remembered for extensive social reforms, raising the minimum wage, expanding social guarantees, and nationalizing key industries. However, he soon faced economic difficulties, prompting a need to moderate the left's course towards more moderate market reforms. In international politics, he actively supported European integration, laying the groundwork for closer ties among countries on the continent. In 1995, Jacques Chirac became president, serving until 2007. He represented a conservative approach and was a charismatic, pragmatic leader. During his presidency, France abolished conscription and transitioned to a professional army, an important step in modernizing the armed forces. His presidency also stood out for criticizing the American invasion of Iraq in 2003, allowing France to adopt an independent position on the world stage. Despite initial popularity, Chirac's second term was marred by social protests and growing discontent. The next president was Nicolas Sarkozy, who held office from 2007 to 2012. His rise to power symbolized a new generation in politics. Sarkozy departed from traditional approaches and actively promoted liberal economic reforms aimed at enhancing the country's competitiveness. However, his presidency coincided with the financial. The crisis of 2008 had a serious impact on the economy. Sarkozy's foreign policy was active, especially regarding Europe and the US, but people often criticized his style. In 2012, socialist François Hollande became president, promising to solve economic issues and ensure social justice. However, his term was challenging due to the ongoing crisis. France faced several terrorist attacks, including the tragic events at the magazine office and the assaults in Paris in November 2015. This caused deep public disappointment and reduced Hollande's popularity, leading him not to seek re-election. In 2017, young and energetic Emmanuel Macron, the founder of a new political movement, became president. His election symbolized a new approach to politics. He positioned himself as a centrist and aimed for economic reforms to liberalize the labor market and modernize the pension system. However, these reforms encountered significant resistance and sparked massive protests, the most notable being the Yellow Vests movement in 2018 and 2019. Nevertheless, Macron managed to retain power and continue his reforms while actively engaging in international politics, promoting ideas of European unity and strengthening the Union. The presidencies of Mitterrand, Chirac, Sarkozy, Hollande, and Macron spanned several decades of modern French history, showcasing a variety of governance approaches. Each leader made a significant contribution to the country's development, facing serious challenges and leaving behind a unique political legacy. Modern France continues on the path of modernization and democratic development, maintaining an important role on the world stage while striving to resolve complex domestic issues like social inequality, migrant integration, and adaptation to new realities. The nation, rooted in principles of liberty, equality, and fraternity, now confronts new challenges such as multiculturalism, economic changes, and social contradictions, alongside its crucial role in the European Union. One of the main challenges is multiculturalism, directly related to the history of the colonial empire and migration following its collapse. After World War II, especially after the Algerian War of Independence, France welcomed millions of immigrants from former colonies. These migrants and their descendants significantly altered the country's demographic makeup. Currently, about 6 million residents have Muslim roots, making France home to the largest Muslim community in Western Europe. Migration flows introduced new cultural elements, but the integration process has been complex. On one hand, the country takes pride in its republican model. On the other, it faces identity conflicts. Vivid examples of these contradictions appeared during the riots in the suburbs in 2005, sparked by social issues and discrimination. Additionally, France became one of the countries most affected by terrorist acts in recent decades. A series of attacks, including the assault on the magazine office, events in the concert hall, and the streets of Paris, revealed society's vulnerability to radicalization. This prompted discussions about security, human rights, and religious freedom. France's economy remains one of the strongest in Europe and the world. The country is a major exporter of goods and services, a leader in aerospace and automotive industries, and a producer of luxury items. Paris is still regarded as the global capital of fashion and fine dining, with renowned brands holding leading positions. On the international stage, France showcases its economic achievements, yet these successes come with significant challenges. The issue of high unemployment, particularly among youth and suburban residents, remains pressing. Strict labor regulations, high tax rates, and relatively slow reform rates in the economy lead to ongoing social unrest and strikes. For instance, in 2018 and 2019, the country faced massive Yellow Vests protests, initially sparked by rising fuel prices, but soon reflecting broader dissatisfaction with social inequality, declining living standards, and government actions. Moreover, France is grappling with serious difficulties in its pension system and social sector. President Emmanuel Macron's attempts to reform pension benefits led to widespread protests and strikes in 2019 and 2023, highlighting the depth of societal contradictions in the country. Foreign policy. France continues to be an important player on the global stage, being a permanent member of the United Nations Security Council and a leading participant in NATO and the European Union. France traditionally occupies a unique position within the EU, supporting deep cooperation while reserving the right to act independently. President Macron actively advocates for Europe's strategic independence and strengthening a common European defense and security policy. France participates in military and humanitarian missions, especially in Africa, where it retains historical influence. The country engages in counter-terrorism operations in the Sahel region and serves as a key partner for many African states. At the same time, France consistently supports the fight against climate change and the implementation of the Paris Agreement, signed in 2015 at the UN Climate Conference held in Paris.